Hi, everyone. Today, my guest is Ashlea Elliott. Ashlea is a globally recognized public speaker, trainer, coalition builder, inclusion strategist, and thought leader in the fields of human rights, inclusion, and peace. As the CEO of Ashlea Elliott Consulting, she drives transformative inclusion innovation at the ecosystem level to accelerate the radical changes needed to create a world that is just, equitable, and safe. As the founder of the Peace is Possible Global Peace Coalition and the co-executive director of Lean In Seattle, she has trained tens of thousands of leaders across more than 166 countries on human rights, equity, and inclusion, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, reducing gender-based violence, and how every person can learn inclusive leadership skills and take action to eliminate structural and cultural violence. All of her curricula are rooted in systems thinking, co-design, inclusion, anti-racist, anti-colonial, and intersectional gender lenses, and provides leaders with actionable resources to apply what they learned in their communities and organizations to drive sustainable change. Ash, welcome. I'm
Hi, thanks so
really
much for having
thrilled.
me today.
Yeah. Um, I know when we first started talking, you just blew me away with everything that you were doing. And I, one of the things that I remember was when you were talking about how you set up Lean In Seattle, and it is like the largest Lean In group.
In the world
Is that
and
correct?
strategically
And
inclusive. Mhm.
yeah, and how did you do that? Tell me the story behind that.
Of course. So I live in King County, so I'm in Seattle, and we have the most diverse minority majority city in almost in the country. There's 180 languages spoken in our chapter. So we had a lot of people who were also immigrating here from lots of different places, people who are transplants, all different career levels. And I was noticing that even though we had all of that diversity, that the speakers and the airtime and the leadership were all Caucasian female, cisgender Caucasian female. And I really wanted to understand why. And so I started going through to figure out what the barriers and exclusions were for all of the different levels of exclusions that you can have, and designed a organizational transformation. Took us a couple of, let's see, it took us 18 months, and we went through 4 different phases to get everyone from 0 to 100 in inclusion, and trained everyone about how to eliminate those barriers for everything that they were doing.
Now, that seems to me so timely right now, because I've talked to different people in different organizations, from Google to private consulting firms, where because of the Black Lives Matter and with the protests that have happened this summer, there's been more introspection than usual in the past about saying, like, okay, how do we deal with inclusion, equity, justice in our organization? And a lot of organizations are getting stuck, right? So they're just talking about it, but they don't have anything that's actionable or even kind of a roadmap, or even if I was going to go back to BJ Fogg, and our work is based in behavior design, what is that aspirational goal? Like, it's not actually clear. It tends to be, well, we want inclusion. And you go, okay, so what does inclusion look like at a practical level, at a everyday behavioral, what are you doing on Monday morning level? Could you tell me a little bit more about what those 4 phases were and what you actually did? And how did you know when you arrived?
Sure. So the first thing that I really did, it was I used biology. So I used to study biology. I was in pre-med for a long time, and I understand the structures of a cell and the different barriers between cells, and what could be, like there's a cell wall for certain types of vegetable cells. And that means that nothing is permeable. You can't get in or out. And then in an animal cell, it is semi-permeable, but for some reason, there are barriers on the outside of this cell that I envision. And so I was really trying to find a way to make the structures of inequities and the structures of inclusion visible and tangible, to help people see what they couldn't see in such a clear and easy way, that when you said, okay, we're going to start on the outside of this, like, you can also think of it as a gobstopper. or
Okay.
a jawbreaker. So a jawbreaker has, in the middle of the jawbreaker, there's this like super jawbreaker, which is, maybe the biggest part, it's kind of the core. And then on each level outside of the core, you have these different layers, like kind of like the rings on a tree. And so I try to think, okay, so from the very center, if the center is political inclusion, where you have full agency and decision-making power of all of the people who come from historically disadvantaged communities, then what are the barriers? What are the different layers of the gobstopper that are on the outside that are keeping people who, let's say, are holding the gobstopper, people who are in the environment, in the city? What is keeping them from getting to that center point? And you have to then dissolve each of the layers of the gobstopper to get from the outside to the core. And so envisioning it, it was like, okay, the first thing that everybody needs to know is what inclusion is. And so I changed how people were talking about inclusion, because a lot of people think that inclusion is the output of diversity hiring. It's the output of the work that they do. They think that it is an end goal, but it's not an end goal. It's the precondition for everything we do. And what inclusion actually is for me, and the way that I've taught it and the way that has been successful 100% of the time in 166 countries from every culture, gender, everyone around the world, is that inclusion is the consistent and continuous effort of eliminating barriers that are keeping people from having full access to either their rights, their basic needs, or their fullest level of potential.
So what would that look like on a super granular practical basis?
Sure. So there's the different types of exclusion. So there's the three big ones: political, economic, and social. But it really has some different layers, some sub layers, which would be those rings around the gobstopper. So that's participatory. There's physical barriers that people have to have to be able to do. And this is really somewhere where you can start on the outside with disability inclusion on the very outside. Can people access this space? Is a safe space? So also, if you're going to have programming where you invite people from the gender nonconforming, LGBTQIA, and trans community into your space, you need to ensure that that space not only is accessible, but that it's a safe space for them, that there's not going to be something that harms them as soon as they come into that space. And so you then eliminate any type of economic barrier that people might have. And so the 4 phases, I started on the outside rings and started peeling off the outside rings and helped people to understand, okay, we have members who are in the gender non-binary and the trans community on our team. They can't access the restroom. They're never having airtime. We need to fix this. So the very highest level, make sure that participation was accessible for everyone and cut down on 2 of the barriers. Then the next step was really accelerating the transformation of airtime, so that we turned it into 50% or more of airtime at all events, in all meetings, had to be from individuals from underrepresented communities. Standard. If you're picking speakers, if you're picking the person who does the introductions, whatever you're picking, and also the team, the composition of the team has to be more than 50% minority individuals. And so we went from, I don't know, 11% of airtime and individuals who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds to 67% in a year.
So how did you do that? Because I know having been at conferences and panels where I'm the one female, right? Or even organizing, even though I'm female, I'm going like, okay, who can we get on the panel? And sourcing those people, because it tends up being the usual suspects, because you're going like, oh, who is it? And it's whoever's top of mind, right? So how do you discover those people, or how do you help those people become discoverable so that can get airtime? Because again, we're talking about like the tactical stuff, like, I've got binders full of women, right? How do we get them in? Because sometimes on the reverse side, when you're reaching out, they might be reluctant because of imposter syndrome, or they're not comfortable public speaking, or like they haven't done it before. And so getting people who haven't had airtime to be comfortable taking the mic.
Yeah, so that's a good question. What I did that I can tell everyone I did is every time we had someone who joined the organization, I went to LinkedIn and I found out what they could do. And if they had a skill for project management, or if they had a skill for marketing, or if they had an interest in public speaking, I would create that opportunity for them. And so if you had someone who said, I'm really interested in public speaking, one of the things that we did is we have a lot of individuals who are English as second or third language speakers. And to shift the narrative of, I'm not sure if I can be a speaker because my English is not very strong, to why would we want people on our team? Why would we want people who have airtime, who are coming from these different backgrounds? Why do we want them to speak? And so it removes a level of tokenism also when you say, I really would like to hear you say this, and I know that everyone else wants to hear your perspective on this. And the fact that you don't have English as your first language is a benefit, because there's 100% of our, let's say like 85% of our audience, also English is a second, third, or multiple language. And so by you being able to articulate when something is not clear, so frequently in English, we'll say like, or, you assume that someone understands what you're saying. We need people to say, no, that's not clear. I don't understand what you're saying. And that helps the people in the audience for whom it was also unclear, but they don't have necessarily the ability to stop a conversation and say, I don't know what you're talking about. And so creating that, it creates value when you have these different individuals who are speaking. And also the coolest thing about it that I love is just generating power. And so that's what I do. And that's what our organization does, is some of the things that people find to be annoying. So running meetings, doing agendas, doing the announcements, public speaking, something that once you've done it a million times, you really would like to create that opportunity for someone else. To let them know, it would help me out so much. Would you please run this meeting? And in doing that, you generate power in things, you surface these opportunities for power, and then people say yes because that's what they really want to do. And also flipping that script of something that you do, it's your part of your everyday life. You really would like someone else to do it. Someone else has never had the chance to do this. And create that as thou a new pipeline for your succession plan, or create a new way for someone to build that confidence, is the most fun thing I've ever done.
Yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday, CEO, woman of color, and we were talking about our upbringings and how we didn't grow up with privilege, and then we're kind of thrust into these situations where we have to, I said like we're like raised by wolves. We have to figure it out all on our own, whereas our Caucasian peers or more elite peers, like they know it, like they had the textbook, they had the mentor, they got the playbook, and where they're going like, okay, how do I do this? How do I do, like kind of figuring it out just through sheer force of will. And then they go, oh yeah, there's a textbook for this. And you go, I just spent the last 4 years figuring this out by myself. So one of the barriers, hidden barriers, in terms of underprivileged communities, is that we actually don't know the playbook. And when I was working in community, it would be simple things like how to run a meeting, right? And it's a funny little soft skill that you go, what's the big deal about running a meeting? But if you don't know how to run a meeting, you have an hour of chaos, right? And it's a tiny thing that you take for granted if you know that skill, or like, okay, let's put together an agenda and all that, and it seems like, oh, this is so boring and tedious, but the absence of that, of those organizational soft skills, are also, I almost think they're like magic spells, right? And if you have the book of spells, you can do amazing things in the world. But if you don't have the book of spells, you're just running around like, I mean, it's not having power. And like, what's the definition of power, Ash, in your world, in terms of like, you want to empower people? What is power?
What is power? Wow. There's tons of definitions of what power is, but power for me is providing someone else with full and no barriers to agency, so that the thoughts and actions and decisions and ideas, or when we talk about innovation, hey, that's not going to work, that feedback, there's that type of power where someone can have that knowledge, that local level knowledge, to say this won't get approved in this particular community. Here's how to add value. And it's everyone who contributes that little bit of value, which is why diverse teams are so incredible, because especially including individuals who are in the non-binary space, or people who come from all different backgrounds and cultures, ethnicities, that have kind of different viewpoints on how things will work. that power is your ability to say, that's not going to work, or your ability to push back and say, hey, I think that we need to do this if we want it to work this way, or having that insights about what we might have missed. And instead of seeing that as a threat, to see it as the best thing ever. Like, oh, hey, I built a website yesterday and someone said, this isn't the easiest thing to register for those events. That's very valuable feedback. That person had power, because then I could shift and I could make it easier. So everyone has these different types of power. And one book I do want to recommend is You Have More Power Than You Think by a local Seattle author, Eric Liu. And it gives some more insights on power.
Oh, fantastic. So some of the things that you're talking about make me think in terms of like the business world or the product development world, we use different language to talk about this stuff, right? So we might say, well, what's the user experience? If you're a UX UI designer, you'd be thinking, okay, I want to get people through this process. I want them to be able to register for the website. I want them to be able to put their item in the shopping cart and check out and successfully pay for it. It's like boom, boom, boom. And so I want to know where people get stuck, where I lose them, where they walk away and I go, ooh, that was a lost purchasing opportunity. That was a lost, you know, opportunity for me to add these people to my mailing list, or whatever it is my goal is, right? My business goal, because I want people to be able to go through the process all the way through completion. So I know what and want to know what those barriers are, because if I lose them because they can't, there's not a bathroom for them, it's like, oh, that's the upstream. Can I fix that? Great. Then I get to the next bit. You know, what is my it's almost like the conversion inclusion is a way to improve your conversion funnel if you
Yeah,
want to get engagement, right? And certainly online, and especially in these days where we're all working digitally and remotely, engagement all of a sudden has become something that is more top of mind for more people who normally didn't have to worry about it because they just operated in real life. Um, and
absolutely.
so to me, like inclusion could be actually be a superpower in terms of your design toolkit, right?
Yeah.
And how are you using it that way?
So for me, following on the example for Lena in Seattle, that's exactly what the gobstopper is. That's the user experience. Okay, so the reason someone tried to come, but they couldn't register. Okay, so we need to fix that and make that process better. Okay, someone wanted to come, but then there was physical barriers. Okay, that's not going to happen. Okay, someone wanted to come, there was a cost, they couldn't come. Okay, that's the barrier that you can remove, and then you can start removing them. It's exactly aligned with that UX process that you just mentioned. And then next is they came, and then there was like an identity threat. There was something in the environment that made them feel like they were being discriminated or stereotyped or tokenized. Okay, you need to eliminate that. Here's how you do that. And so the next level would then be relational power and social capital. Do they know the people who, once they're in the organization, are they being engaged? Is there a way to talk to them? Do they feel like they could reach out and ask for a resource from another individual on the team? And that's a key thing that happens on businesses when people need to share information and there's a block there. And then the next stage is, you know, that participatory. Are they part of deciding what the plans are? And so how are you co-creating that next product line, or how are you managing the roadmap of what's important? It's exactly aligned to the process you just said.
Interesting. So Chris Bennett, who's our game designer in residence, he created this mini course on game design thinking. And so he has the core engagement loop, right, which is like the 3 to 4 steps that game designers use to get you through a series of gameplay. So like say if you were playing Angry Birds or something, it's like, okay, you have your bird, you aim it, you know, did you knock everything down or not? Yay, you did, and then you do it again, right? Amazon, the core loop is you go in, you search, you find your product, you put it in your shopping cart, and you check out. I mean, that's like the most elemental steps of the game of Amazon. But then he says, then there's this longer engagement journey, which in the game designers call it the compulsion analysis, but we relabeled it to something friendlier. So in the engagement journey, you say, okay, I got them to buy once, right? Amazon. What's going to make them come back tomorrow? What's going to make them come back a week from now, a month, a year from now? And so then you start thinking about how you deepen that experience and you level up. But the game is still the same. They're still buying stuff over time, right? But it's Amazon Prime and Amazon Subscribe, and they're writing reviews. And he goes, what happens as you go deeper into that engagement journey is it becomes more social. right? Where those, so, you know, people do a lot of, Amazon is a search engine for a lot of people, right? They don't necessarily go to buy, but they do there to do research. It's almost like consumer reports, and they're reading the reviews and they're comparing this, and it's part of their process. And other people go to Amazon for entertainment when you look at those, some of those Amazon reviews. So all of a sudden there's people find roles for themselves
Mhm.
in that ecosystem, right? To participate in that, that's richer than just going in, shopping, and having it delivered. Although that's sort of like the underlying business model that allows you to do all these other things. Um, so inclusion seems to me like it would be a really nice lens for any designer to say, okay, what are the, not only the technical barriers, but the physical barriers and the psychological barriers, because I want to create a better product or I want to create a better experience. And if you look at it that way, it's like, who wouldn't want to do that? Who wouldn't want to create an extraordinary customer experience? And for, you know, because we want to touch as many people as possible. That just seems to be smart business, right?
Mhm.
So exclusion seems to be counterproductive to having a thriving enterprise, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Mhm. Exactly. When I designed the processes that I use, that's really how I designed it. It aligns very much with game theory, and how do you get, on my sheet it was triangles, triangles for individuals who were from you know, historically disadvantaged or minoritized communities. How do I get them from the outside of the gobstopper to the core of the gobstopper? How do I get them from out here to in here? And what are each of the things that are blocking them or having them turn away? So which are the inclusions that they're encountering, and how do you then dissolve those? How do you dissolve those exclusions so that they can get all the way through? And so if it's they want to do speaking, they want to have more airtime, then we need to create a channel to make it more permeable, and so then we can dissolve each of the layers. That's exactly what it is. And so the whole is kind of like a game design. It's just the analog version of getting those triangles into the center of the gobstopper.
Mm-hmm. So, so this seems to be like at the heart of what inclusive innovation is, and what other ideas or what other methods and tools do you use for inclusive innovation?
Sure. So inclusive innovation, there's a couple of folks who I love, and I can just say their names here. So I love Theory U by Otto Scharmer from MIT. There's also just a couple of really incredible folks who are writing for the Harvard Business Review. There's Mark Grzon, and then Sandra Sushar and Shalem Gupta Haru. I apologize if I've mispronounced, but incredible, incredible. And so it's a combination. And so I've wielded my ideas and also the ideas and some of the common language that they have. And so there's understanding the social field, and then that integral vision. So like, I can see the system, but
Mhm.
can other people see the system? And also, can they see the different levels and also the interactions between the systems? And if not, how do I help people see those different systems and how they interact? How do I create an experience where people can understand what's happening? And then the next is to build the container. So I need to architect an environment or an ecosystem in which the next steps can happen. And I need to be able to bring in multiple different stakeholders. And often when it comes to a global inclusion effort, people who come from a very different background, who have a long-standing historical divide. Then how do you create the common language that everyone uses inside in the container? And then how do you understand the barriers to trust that are between the different groups? What does trust mean to each group of stakeholders? And then how do you create that common language to help everyone in the container have the same levels of trust, or how to meet those metrics of trust, how to overcome those obstacles of trust, which are oftentimes very valid and multi-generational. And then the next is applying practice theory to the whole space. And so I'll find a way to make that more digestible, because let me say it this way. Okay.
Okay.
I need people to see the solar system,
Mm-hmm.
because the solar system is what is needed in order to create the inclusive and equitable, you know, society that we need to have peace. That's what's needed. And also to say, Inclusion is part of peace, because inclusion, the whole point is to have elimination of exclusions and barriers to promote the equitable distribution of resources and make sure everyone can reach their fullest potential. So inclusion and equity, it is peace. And so that's how they're all kind of interconnected. But in order to do it, you need to bring everybody who's in the solar system to a point where they can see the solar system and they can see the stars and they can see the galaxies and they understand how things move and how they interact. But it's not just being in that space. It's what Otto Scharmer talks about when he talks about dialogue, and you need to help people be able to be part of the system. And so you need to understand where you are. Okay, I'm on Earth in the solar system. What does that mean about what's moving around me? Okay, and then you need to be able to think about, okay, if I was no longer on Earth, but I'm in the solar system and I need to be able to understand how it works. What if I'm a star? What does it look like from that perspective? What does it look like from the perspective of the furthest away planet? What does it look like if you're standing on Neptune versus what does inclusion look like if what does your experience look like if you're on a star?
Right.
And helping the people to see not only the system from different perspectives, but to be able to see the whole system, and then how to design within it using a common language and developing that trust between the planets and the stars and the galaxies.
Yeah. So Mark Nelson, who founded the Peace Innovation Lab at Stanford, and we, in our working relationship that's now going on 12 years, early on there was a lot of conflict. Really, a lot of conflict, and it was interesting going through that process. And because he would ask me, so what are you seeing? And I would be reluctant to tell him, or if I felt like he was going to disagree, it's like, oh, like, you want me to agree with you. And finally we came up with this metaphor similar to the solar system, which is basically saying, okay, I'm the left eye and you're the right eye. I'm asking the right eye what the right eye is seeing. And it isn't one of like that the left eye is wrong, the left eye is seeing what the left eye is seeing. And we use that metaphor a lot now of saying like, okay, are you a telescope? Are you a microscope? Are you the webcam on the corner of the building? What is it that you're seeing? Because that all helps us get a higher resolution of what reality is. So it's not reasonable, it's not even realistic or plausible that two cameras at two completely different angles, at two different resolutions can see the identical thing. It's just not going to happen. We would think that's absurd. We wouldn't say that the microscope and the telescope that they would get in an argument. The telescope's saying, I'm sorry, I can't see the little viruses, and the microscope is insisting there are viruses here. And they're going, but you're wrong because I can't see them, right? That would be stupid. And so then we start saying, okay, so that is also in terms of people's point of view, their lived experience, their lens. What do you see from where you stand, right? Who you are geographically, politically, gender, all of it, because that it's almost like layers of Instagram filters, right? And and all of them are valid.
All of them are valid.
Yeah. And so then you say like, oh, okay. So then we're not in disagreement. We're just trying to represent reality.
Yeah.
And that's a different question altogether. And so one of the things that we think about a lot and talk about a lot is how do you form the question? Because depending upon the question you ask, it's going to tilt the answer in a particular way, right? And so we tend to flip the script because we're very interested in positive engagement and positive peace. And now what Mark and I we're working around with a definition of active peace, which is really about what people do. So instead of saying, okay, we want to focus on negative peace, which is we want people to stop doing something, it's like, don't do that, right? But that's very limiting. And there's also this loss aversion. You're telling people something that they can't do. And it's like telling a kid that toy that they were never interested in, that you're taking it away. And all of a sudden, they're like, I want that toy. And you go, you've been ignoring it all this time. Now that I told you you can't do it, you're all over it. Instead, saying like, this is what we want you to do. And so almost like the whole mask, no mask debate, maybe if it had been posed aspirationally, what are all the things we can do to protect ourselves? And what are the things that you can habituate yourself to do? BJ Fogg, focus mapping, highest impact that you can do, and getting what combinations of things can you do that protect yourself and others. And if the question had been posed that way, then it's not a binary. I hate binaries because nature isn't a binary. It's not like nature has one type of tree and no tree. It's like, you want trees? I got trees. You want a tree that grows in a swamp? I got a tree that grows in a swamp. You want a tree that grows in a desert? I can make one of those too. I mean, like, you can have any kind of tree you want. So nature doesn't operate in binaries. So why do people do that? How do
Yeah.
you get around that?
How do I get around the binaries?
So like when you're working, no, like when you're working with people to help to move their thinking along, or for people who might have mental barriers around these things.
Okay, I think examples are helpful. So last year I engaged on a 9-month-long, 6-continent peace tour where I traveled all around the world, and I trained everybody from 168 countries. But I also did a really fun thing for myself, which I was doing climate research, and all the places that I went to had they were all volcanic islands, or there was a volcanic element to almost everywhere that I went. And so what was really fun for me, and also there was also a lot of really cool historical places for me to go that just had massive scale. So I could stand on the bottom and then I could stand at the top and show people the different perspectives. And so I tried to turn that into an actual scenario where it was like, okay, I need to help people understand that dialogue is getting a full picture of what the system looks like, but each person only has a view from one place. So I took helicopter rides over the top of the volcanoes to show people down how they kind of work themselves through the different crevices, where the water goes, where the lava is coming out. And then I went underneath the volcanoes. I went deep, 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 deep down into the lava tubes, went to all different types of lava. So if you're on a volcanic island, there's one part that looks like Mars and it looks like chocolate cake. It has like this really unique, this super duper unique texture.
Oh, this is the basalt.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
And then there's these lava tubes that you can lay down in. It's like a luge. And so you can imagine how it's coming down. And then when I was in Argentina,
Yeah.
you could see the cone ones where it really shot out the other side, and you can kind of see all the differences. And then you can start imagining, okay, how did this happen? And then you stand at the different parts of that geography. And I think some people they're able to see that. And so I also went to this incredibly huge, massive castle, which is in Barcelona. It's the Museum of Art, and it's huge. And so when you're on the ground, you're looking up at these huge columns, which are just stories and stories and stories high. And you realize that you have to go up a lot of stairs to get to the top. And at the very top, there's a dome. And so I brought everyone into that experience. I was like, okay, now I'm at the bottom. And then from the very top, I showed them the perspective of looking back down, but also I laid on the floor of the dome to say, even within the dome, this is what I'm looking like, or this is how you get around it. Here are all the different places, so that everyone can say, like, you have a different perspective, but nothing about it has changed, to give them that concrete example. And I thought that was really helpful to explain to folks how they can all have a valid experience, and also that we all have to work together, because it's kind of like a fingerprint reader. We each only have one part. You have to put your finger on it a bunch of different times for it to work. Yeah. We need everyone to contribute what they see so that we can see the whole system. And a lot of times it's the people whose voices aren't being heard, who see something very important and something critical that the rest of us are missing. And if their voice is not part of that conversation, you're going to develop in the wrong direction, because you're missing that crucial element. So
and I think I certainly, when I look at solutions that are designed by very well-intentioned people, and you see that a lot in philanthropy and in foundations, very, very well-intentioned. I even see that, like, with students at Stanford, and I go, I'll come in as a judge for a final project for social impact and all that, and I'll look at the composition of the students, and I'll look at the target, and I go like, I mean, again, it's a learning opportunity for them to get immersed in the issues and all that, and I get all that. I get the value of all that, right? But I'm going like, oh, but you still have objectified the people that you're looking to serve. how do you, in your models of innovation and design and code design, how do you get around that? Especially, tokenism is real, right? Um, how do you change, because there are power imbalances in design. What are practical things that people can do to level that out?
For my consultancy, so I have a brand new product, which is the Elliott Incubator, or Elliott Inclusion Incubator and Accelerator. And this is a product portfolio of how to reach inclusion, how everyone can have the same standard and understanding of what inclusion is. And the reason that it exists is because every single current approach and plan and initiative and diversity hiring and diversity metrics objectifies and creates harm for the individuals who you think it's there to benefit. So if you have different type of metrics, then you're causing a stereotype by labeling that person as a diversity hire for the rest of their career. If you have other elements where you're tracking metrics, every time you try to align someone with their identity, oh hey, we have some new folks who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds and you're going to lead our ERG, and hey, we want to have some conversations about what's going on in the world, we think you should lead them. All of the approaches right now create harms. Exactly what you said. There's unintended consequences on all of these different things because people are seeing people who have a diverse identity as an object to be counted instead of having people be the subject to co-create the policies, to have the decision-making process, the agency to be part of that decision-making of what happens and how to co-create that environment so that it's really inclusive for everyone. And all of the current approaches are designed to fail. When you take them into a systems thinking approach, there's 50 different ways that current DEI approaches fail by design. When you take it to a systems thinking level, and how you create those accidental adversaries, because you create trainings that have either negative sentiment, which you were just talking about, which creates further harm to the individuals it's trying to help. You try to tell someone they're bad and not have a bias. You try to tell someone they're bad because they can't change their individual behavior. All of them are designed, and seemingly strangely, no one seems to notice that they all harm.
Right.
And so people are wondering why the DEI efforts are failing, but they're designed to fail. And they're also, unfortunately, seriously harming all the individuals who they're trying to engage in these places that are then supposed to be safe for them, but they're not. And so
Yeah.
that's really the heart of what I do is helping people to understand in a very objective way the downstream and multi-level systems way that is going to cause more harm.
Yeah, and there's certain professions that don't attract women and communities of color. They're very homogeneous for whatever reason, or just because it's just never been whatever reason. I mean, Mexican American, Yaqui Native American background, in my heritage, working class. My dad was a construction worker, so it's not like anyone there could help me navigate, white collar work or higher ed or any of that. Um, but they wanted me to level up that way. And one of the, I don't, for people in, so what happened in high school is I would sometimes be, people's pity project. They go, oh, she's smart and she's Mexican American, and and so they would help, but it would be from a spirit or from a place of pity, right? Whereas if I had been white, they would have said, I don't know, the energy would have been different about that. And so yeah, so it is about being the object and saying like, okay, this is this like this little snowflake, and treating me as if I was more fragile than I was, rather than saying like, oh, she's actually strong and capable and she can do this. It was a weird overprotecting in some ways, and in the other, when I worked for Getty Oil, which was very sexist because I was a petroleum engineer of all things. Good idea. 5'2", 100 pounds out in the oil fields. There it was very sexist, but it was very paternal, right? They didn't want me to get hurt. They said, this is a man's job. It's really dirty. It was true. It's literally really dirty work. You come home from work and you've got oil and tar under your nails and you smell of rotten eggs because this was down in Kern County. And so the oil fields have a lot of sulfur in them. It smells like hell, every day. And it just, I mean, it really was dirty work. And I was so small. And I look back on my 21-year-old self. I must have looked like this little itty bitty little thing, 100 pounds, wearing the steel toed shoes that weighed more than I did, right? And they're probably going, she's going to get hurt. And you know what? From a actual practical matter, I probably was because the tools were really big and heavy and but any small person would have gotten hurt. And so, but they were very, they didn't hide it, right? But at least I knew what I was working with. And I was like young feminist engineer, I can do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, but I knew what I was dealing with. I knew you could have a conversation with them about it and say like, look, yeah, we disagree. Um, and that was legit. When I went into tech in Silicon Valley, the guys were progressive and they were sexist, but it wasn't overt. So you thought they were allies, but they really weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would say, oh yeah, this is terrible, you won't get very far, there are these obstacles because you're female. I remember having the lunches where basically someone would be like, but maybe in your daughter's time things will get better. And now at this age I realize, wait a minute, you were a manager or director in this organization, you weren't an ally because you didn't say, and I'm going to do something to change that.
Mm-hmm.
All they told me was, yeah, here are these barriers, too bad, so sad that you're a young talented female. But when they actually had the power to do something about it and they did not, right? And maybe were they clear on that in their own heads or what? But it was hard to combat that sexism because I didn't know what I was dealing with. And so I thought that people were allies when they actually weren't. At least in the oil fields, I knew exactly where I stood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I don't know, does that make any sense, Ash?
Of course. That's the lived experience of all individuals who are going through this entire process, of that combination of parentalism, infantilism, but ultimately all of it comes down, all of those different elements that you've just talked about really, and especially in this particular moment of time. So something that I have to bring up in a lot of different places is that a lot of the efforts right now for racial justice that are happening around the world, and a lot of individuals who are white or who are from a dominant culture who are showing up with their bodies and their voice to ensure that the individuals who are participating in those communities are safe. And a lot of individuals who are coming at it from, if you're in an organization and you're like, okay, well, I support the Black Lives Matter movement, or I really support our Black and brown and individuals of color who are on our teams. A lot of even those types of approaches are based in colonialist, white supremacist, paternalistic elements. Because what a lot of individuals are trying to do is to ensure that the people are safe while they're there because they recognize the danger. And so for me, as far as peace work, that's the wrong approach. That approach requires the presence of an individual from the dominant class to prevent further violence, whether it's direct, structural, or cultural, from the individuals who are trying to stand up for their own human rights. And the problem with that is that as soon as if you achieve your goal, if you are an individual who is coming from a dominant class and you're participating in that action or event or conversation, and you go to the bathroom or you go home, on the way home from that experience that you've just had, that shared experience, this also is a lot of the individuals who are coming in to have these dialogues where individuals in the United States, it happens to people who are Black and brown, talk about their experience with racism, sexism, people who have disabilities talking about their experiences. Yeah, you have this moment of vulnerability where you're in the same room in the conversation with individuals who support you and who are there for you. But when those people go home, you have to walk home alone or roll home alone, however you get around. And that's a really big, that's what people are missing. You don't need to design the world to protect people like when you're there. You need to make sure that the systems and structural violence and cultural violence are dissolved so that people can walk around on their own without you. As long as you're imagining your presence there, or as long as you're and that's a stage that happens in long-term advocacy that you can't reach without watching how it harms other people, or unless you've had that experience where everyone was safe when you were together, but on the way home from the Pride Parade, your trans friend was murdered. And
Yeah.
you need to understand that. And I think that that's a huge element, is what we really need to do in the peace work and the equity is we need to make sure that people who are coming from these communities experiencing structural and cultural violence, in addition to direct violence, that they're safe no matter where they go. If they walk into any meeting, if you work for a company that's like in all different countries, and they walk into a meeting in a different country or in a different room, or if you have an event in a different city, that you have designed that event to ensure that the individuals are safe no matter where they are. You know, if they're walking through the door, if they're on the streets, and you have to design it that way.
This is really deep, Ash, because people usually get stuck at the ally level. And certainly I see that in my social feeds where it's like, okay, how to be a better ally. But that still is stuck in the box of they're only safe if I'm there in the room with them.
Correct.
Right? Because I'm going to stick up for them. I'm going to stick up for them. I'm going to be the upstander in the bullying situation, which is, it's necessary, but it's not the only thing, right? Yeah, you need that voice to do that. But the structural issues, it's more of architecture. One of the things we've been talking about within Peace Innovation is concepts like how would you design the built environment? You know, the design of urban spaces, like, you know, as a thought experiment, what would cities look like if they were designed for women and children?
Right.
Right? And what would the priorities be in terms of the investment in infrastructure? What would the cities look like if they were designed to prioritize the elderly? It would look different. What would cities look like if they were prioritized for these other things? All of a sudden, you see these shifts, right? And then again, from a behavior design standpoint, we go, once you've changed the built environment, then certain behaviors all of a sudden become automatic or just extremely easy, right? We could say, you know, Americans should really ride bicycles more often, right? You know, it would be better for the environment if everyone, you know, rode their bike instead of drove. But then you look at the built environment and you go, you know what? You're putting your life into your hands. You're going to ride that bicycle on that busy street. You know, the pedestrian and bicycle deaths in San Francisco are extraordinary.
Mhm.
You know, and they're pro bicycling, but the built environment still isn't optimized to guarantee their safety. So why would you do that, right? And so part of it is fundamentally how we design building. I mean, because that's sort of an expression of values. I'm really focused right now on built environment. Anything that's built, like you know, the accessibility features on my phone, and I'm going like, okay, I'm going to look at that. Or even like Apple News now does audio for news stories, right? Well, people are now used to podcasts and they go, okay, great. Instead of reading the news stories, you can listen to them. And I go, well, that's great for me. I can, well, back when I was walking before the bad air, I could listen to the stories, but I go, oh, this is an accessibility issue as well. It's removed a barrier, but it's mainstream. If it had been like very niche, we're only going to do this for people who are vision impaired, then nobody would have done it. But because now we see that this would be good for everyone, it's there. And I thought, but yeah, that's a very inclusive design feature, even though they don't tout it that way.